session by my boss, and it is part of my KPI. And I will need you all to help me get a 5. Yes, I need you all to help me get a 5. So the only condition for me to get a 5 is to engage the audience. Are you going to help me with that?
Yes.
Oh, that's evidence. Prof, you heard yes already. Thank you, everyone. I'm just standing on the existing protocol, and I will be introducing Prof. Punya Mishra. Prof. Punya Mishra is the Director of Innovative Learning Features at the Learning Engineering Institute, and is also the professor in the Mary Louis Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. He is internationally recognized for his work in educational technology, the role of creativity and aesthetics in learning, and the application of design-based approaches to educational innovation. He has received over $11 million in grants, published over 200 articles, and edited 5 books. With over 63,000 citations. I am one of those, I'm very sure, because when I was introduced to the space of educational technology, his framework, TPAC, I don't know if you know the TPAC model, was like a household framework. If you haven't cited TPAC, you haven't started work. Yes, you haven't written a literature review yet. So I can imagine why he has so much citation. He's ranked among the top 2% of scientists worldwide and the top 50 scholars, top 10 in psychology, with the biggest influence on educational practice and policy. Dr. Mishra is an award-winning instructor who has taught courses at undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels in the area of educational technology, educational psychology, design, and creativity. He is also an engaging public speaker, well, we will confirm that today, and an accomplished visual artist and poet. Today, he will be engaging us on education in an age of generative AI, learning from the past to the future. Please help me give Prof. Mishra a resounding round of applause while
Badru. I would much prefer that the introduction be much more moderate, then the bar is much lower. Set the bar too high. I want to thank Dr. Hugo, Naina Amin, who invited me here. Could not say no to her. I've known her for about 21 years, I think now. Dr. Thamal Sivi, and Badru, of course, for the introduction. So thank you for inviting me. This is my first time in Durban, so I'm really excited. Sort of feel like that inside. And there are 3 countries which have been sort of critical to who I am today. So India being where I was born, the United States where I live, and South Africa where I am here today. And I think the connection there is very deep. In some ways, Mahatma Gandhi starting his ideas of non-violence and civil disobedience here in this country, which in some ways is sort of hallowed ground for all of us who believe in this world that we live in and make it better. And then, of course, inspiring Martin Luther King in the United States with the civil disobedience there, and then Nelson Mandela, again, a huge hero for all of us. But there's also one more thing that connects me with South Africa, which is cricket. These are household names. If you ask my son and daughter, they will know all of these names. And I could have gone on and on adding to that list. I just ran out of space. I also have to apologize on behalf of being an Indian fan for the Cricket World Cup. That game could have gone any which way, and I will say to my joy it went the way it did. But I do have to apologize for that. A little bit more about me. I think Badru told you that I am the Director of Innovative Learning Features. This is a new position that I've taken on. Almost everything I do is publicly available on my website, so I do recommend a lot of the things that I will talk about today will be based on stuff that I've written on my website through my blog and so on. So you're going to look at that. In terms of my background, I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. ended up wanting to be a designer and a filmmaker, wanting to make educational film. I'll talk a little bit about that. Ended up in education. The way I describe myself, I do a lot of educational research, I do teach, I do blah, blah, blah. But I think of myself as an educational designer. The idea being that all of us are involved in this act of making things that we have better in some shape or form. That's what education is all about. I'm of course a parent to 2 children. I've been a member of the school board when I was at Michigan State University. And so I've had over the years a chance to look at education and what it means from a variety of different angles. And I hope to bring some of that into this context of what does it mean to teach and learn in this age of AI. Is it poison? Is it medicine? We should try and figure it out. And the way I would do it is by taking what I call sort of a long view, because I've been in this field long enough now that I think there's a little bit of perspective that I can bring to that, and I hope to bring to that. So, and again, as in any story, what are sort of the touch points? I will talk about 3 key moments, and I think what I learned from them, and then try to see how we can apply that to this new world that we live in. So coming to the first key tech moment in my life, I was, grew up in a small little state called Mizoram, which is in the northeast of India, just north of Myanmar. That's me with hair back in the day. And the reason I bring that up is because when I was growing up there, we didn't have electricity. So this is what every evening was. Every evening there was a lighting of lamps. I don't know if you know what the Petromax is. Does anybody know what the Petromax is? So we'd have that, and we'd have these lanterns. That's how cooking was done. That's how you would study. But basically your life was determined by the rising and setting of the sun, right? That's how your life was. And then one fine day we got electricity, and I must have been 7, 8 years old. I still remember this, running from room to room, flipping this and seeing this magical thing. And this technology has a future. I mean, there's something good that's happening there. And one of the things that as now when I look back and I think about what does it mean to have this all around us and so natural and such as given, there is this thing of what we call the adjacent possible. There's this thing which happens, which is you switch on something, light comes on. But there is something that happens which is adjacent to that. Things that you wouldn't have predicted necessarily that emerge out of that. So let's look at some. So electricity means there's safety in the dark, right? Okay, given. But then you also have cultural shifts. You start having things like nightlife. You have extended shopping hours. You have the second shift for work. You have the night owl economy. This one is interesting, the sleep revolution. Turns out that the people who live in, when we used to live without electricity, there used to be this cycle of sleep where you go to bed when the sun sets, then you wake up in the middle of the night, and then you would go back to sleep again, and that has completely been disrupted in the world that we live in today, because we can stay up later, that cycle has been disrupted. It has sort of physical consequences, emotional consequences possibly as well. Then of course the health impacts of that, light pollution, energy consumption, ecological disruption, all from that flipping this little thing on and off, right? So I think one of the things we need to understand in technology is not just to understand the technology, but to understand the adjacent effects that emerge from it. Right, so that's one. So second, this is a little bit of an extended story. So my father got transferred from New Delhi to, from Mizoram to New Delhi over there, and that's a picture of my school. And growing up, that was very transformational for me. I found a group of really close friends, and I was just interested in everything. I would read the back of a toothpaste label if I never would read. Art, music, history, science, mathematics, everything. In fact, one of the books here you will see is Godel Bach, which is reading about artificial intelligence when I was in high school. That's how, so life is coming full circle, 50 years later. But in India, if you're good at science and maths, doesn't matter if you are interested in other things and art and literature, you end up going to become either an engineer or a doctor. So I ended up going to engineering school, which I call the 4 worst years of my life. I went in this enthusiastic, energetic, 18-year-old, and that's what I looked like when I came out. And then more jokes apart, it was also how it affected me personally. I felt like I was a failure. I felt I had wanted to go and wanted to be a scientist, wanted to be a physicist. I was writing poetry about relativity when I was in, physics class. And all of that just got beat out of me. In some ways, the benefit when I look at it, though I would love to get those 4 years back, is that it made me a better educator. this kid who's sitting in the back who's not paying interest, then it's not their fault, it's my fault. It's the fault of the systems we've created, it's the fault of the processes we have created, it's the fault that we have not created the right experiences for that person, right? That the responsibility at the end of the day lies on us, because I was that kid who got beat down, and I had the energy, I had the passion, I wanted to learn, but the system just didn't care. You know, you do good at the exam, that's it, the rest of it didn't matter. But, you know, so what do you do? 4 years, you finish this, you got a degree, you don't know what the hell to do with it. And so I said, you know, I love art, I love films, you know, I still love math and I love science. So I was like, okay, I grew up watching things like Cosmos and Life on Earth, reading a set of math. I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make educational film. Because I was very confident that I could not be a scientist. So it was like, okay, at least I can convey my love for this field to others. And so I ended up going to this place in IIT Bombay called the Industrial Design Center to get my master's degree. And that's where I met this guy. So this is the old Mac SC. This is, you know, back in when was this, 84, 88? So 88, 89, you know, floppy disks, you know, the old version of Microsoft Word, you do that. But I had programmed it before. In Bitspilani, I had programmed using this stuff, and I hated it. Like, you type this out, you leave it overnight, you come back, they find one error in your code, and then you have to go back and type the whole thing again. Here suddenly was this interface where I could draw a line, I could write one line of code and things could happen. That interface, and I was like, oh, here is something where my interest in science, my interest in education, my interest in media can all come together. So that's what I sort of felt like once I sort of really started working with this machine. And that's actually a picture of me still with hair, working on the computer. And that's a former student of mine who became head of department. He kept that computer in his office, so I got a picture with it many, many years later. Started programming in this thing called HyperCard, and started working with the physics professor, creating simulations using HyperCard. This software doesn't even exist anymore. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of software for that time that it was designed. And basically what happened there was that I found that I had found this intersection that would then define the rest of my career and my life going forward. That it was going to be at the intersection of education and design. That, you know, that intersection was where I found a home and a family and a community and a history and tradition that I could then build on, that I could be a part of, right? I felt I had come home. And that's what brought me then to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign to get my PhD. As I was getting my PhD, that was the time when the internet had the internet was there, email had started kicking off, but the web started happening. And I had an assistantship in this place called the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, NCSA, which is where the first internet browser Mosaic was built. Those guys who built it went up and formed Netscape. Mark Andreessen, most famously, was the head of Netscape, now is sort of a lunatic. If you've seen his latest manifesto, it's kind of scary. You know, rich people, something goes off in their heads, I think. But it was a transformational piece of technology. That's one of my original websites that I built. Now, this is a moment which I felt was really powerful. Somebody told me about this software called WebStar. I said, what is WebStar? I said, oh, you can create your own web server. I said, what does that even mean? So I remember one night in the computer lab, I downloaded the software and I fired it up and said, welcome to WebStar. Like, okay. I went to another computer in the lab and I typed out an IP address like 198.162 or whatever. And a page came up saying, welcome to WebStar. I went back to this computer, I changed one word, hit save, came back, reloaded the page, that word had changed. And I remember this moment as clearly as that moment of running around from room to room switching off a light. Because it struck me that the world had changed dramatically. That suddenly anybody could now be a publisher. All the things that have come after this, whether it's TikTok videos or it's Instagram or it's the internet or it's email or what have you, comes from that moment of my life. It's like, wow, anybody can be an author and can reach out to anybody in the world. And that was like really moment. And so I jumped right into the internet. I've had a website since, I don't know, 1996 maybe. And I was supposed to be finishing a PhD, and I came across this book called Discovering. It's an interesting book. It's not a great book, but there is this one throwaway section where Robert Bernstein talks about the fact that there are more than 400 different representations of the periodic table of elements. And I'm like, this is what the periodic table looks like. What are 400 different? Then I start digging into it. So many different representations. And I'm like, what are all these things? And that was like 1 year of my life wasted trying to understand this. Like, where did these come from? Why this? Why not that? And that ended up becoming my dissertation. Now, I wanted to create something which could be shared. And so obviously it had to be the web. And so I created this piece of software called FLIPS, called Flexible Learning in the Periodic System, which allowed you to navigate these different representations, look and compare across them. Now, if you think about the way the periodic table is set up, the standard one, you'll see there's a set of elements which are always put in the bottom, the Latinite and Antonite series. And the reason they are put in the bottom is because you could fit it within a page. And suddenly, because you are now on the web, you could zoom in, you could zoom out, it gave you possibilities which you couldn't have. So you could create an interactive artifact that allowed students to engage with ideas in new ways. Of course, sadly, because it used the Shockwave plugin, which doesn't exist anymore, the software doesn't work anymore, such as the nature of technology sometimes. But that bigger understanding or insight that now we live in a world where traditional boundaries and gatekeepers of conveying knowledge and information to each other were dropping. You can see that with the advent of different social media apps and so on. And then I'm looking at the Arab Spring, and it's like, wow, this is the next Gutenberg revolution. This is the democratization of knowledge. This is transforming the world. And this is where I'll talk a little bit more about it. This is where I realized when I look back now how naive in some ways I was, because I didn't realize that these tools could also be weaponized. Right? That this device that we carry here, we talk about young people being addicted to it, we are all addicted to it. Don't get me wrong, I am as addicted to it as any teenager is. Just in a different way. I am not on TikTok, I'm on LinkedIn. Same dopamine hit as TikTok is giving you, right? And that these tools have been designed to exploit our vulnerabilities, our cognitive deficiencies in a certain way, is now when I look back and I think about that. And also, that there is an underlying economic and socio-economic model within which these tools are playing out. There could have been a very different history of the internet if very early on we hadn't gone for free. Because the moment something is free, you are the product. You see, the moment you pay even a penny for something, you can now call the shots. Right? So there was a very different possible history, but that let data mining and all of that stuff and pushing you towards more extreme content so that you would stay on the site longer, all of those things are emergent of the broader socioeconomic system, of the broader schisms that are already in society, of the broader inequalities that are already in society. So that's sort of an insight. And we can look at the consequences that we have been reading about. And so what that brings us is that we need to be a little more circumspect or careful, prudent, just be cautious when we're thinking about new technologies. Because no technology works in a vacuum. All right? It enters the world already racked by a history of racism, sexism, xenophobia, and other forms of marginalization and oppression. I mean, the land I'm standing on right now is testimony to that, right? And all working within economic systems that value profit over human needs and values. And those are the broader contextual factors within which these technologies work. So, when we think about it, the technological change, it's not additive, it's ecological. So what that means is, this is taken from Neil Postman, who was writing about television, was incredibly insightful about all forms of technology and how it plays out in the world. That there is not a world which didn't have television and we added television to it. And it's world plus television. No, the world changes the moment television enters that space. When OpenAI released ChatGPT, that's a different world we live in than the world that was the day before it was released. Because it changes all forms of human interaction, it changes education, it changes this, touches on that. It's a different world, right? And I think what's important to understand from an educational point of view, because I was doing research, you could go on my blog, and I can go on my blog and find posts about how to use social media in my classroom. Now, whether or not a teacher used social media or uses social media in the classroom has been changed because of social media. Because the world around you has changed. There's this famous quote by Edison where it said that film is going to transform education, and people say, look, film did transform education. Actually, film did transform education. It was the advent of film and radio that allowed for movements of independence across the colonial nations to spread, for those ideas to spread. It also allowed for fascism to spread. It also created a huge multi-billion-dollar industry of entertainment and so on. And all of that changed the classroom that we teach. Whether or not you use film in your classroom doesn't matter. Your classroom, your school, your university, your education institution now lives in a different world. So that's the second point. The technological change is not additive, it's ecological. The third key moment comes after I finished my PhD, ended up going to Michigan State University, where I met this guy, very cool looking guy called Matt Taylor. He looks very cool even without glasses. And then he and I, we did like each other very much when we first met, ended up becoming the closest of friends, I think maybe my closest friend and colleague that I have. And we did a lot of work together, particularly looking at this idea of bringing design to teacher education and pedagogy. So a whole bunch of articles came out of that, and then Badru, of course, mentioned the TPAC framework. I'm extremely proud of this work. I love the citations that I get for it, so thank you, Badru, for citing me, and for inciting people to cite even more. That's good, makes my career, I like it. But it is also kind of ironic that you are known for a Venn diagram. That's your claim to fame. What did you do? I made a Venn diagram, okay. But it's worked out well for me with the citations and all of that stuff. But more importantly, I think what has been meaningful to both Matt and me is the impact that it has had on research, the impact that it has had on practice, the impact that it has on teacher education, teacher professional development, not just in the US, but across the world. And that truly is, when you get into a field, you hope that you will do something that other people will read, but not just read, but they will inculcate and apply to their lives and their work, their professional work, and that's very, very meaningful. But this idea of bringing design, or seeing a teacher and educator as a designer, there was another insight within that, which is that there is no such thing really as an educational technology. Microsoft Word was not designed for you to teach with, PowerPoint was not designed for you to teach with, ChatGPT was not designed for you to teach with, most technological tools that are Google Slides, Google Docs, what have you. But what do educators do? We take that and we repurpose it. We find ways of taking that website or information and we repurpose it for our purposes, for our needs, for our classrooms. So this idea that teachers are creative designers was a very powerful one that sort of emerged from the work that Matt and I did. And then educators and designers, initially when we were working when I was at Michigan State, I was to think of them as designing, you have something like Flips, a piece of software, which is an artifact. And what educators were designing processes and experiences. So a lesson plan is a process. It's saying this is how we do it, but two teachers with the same lesson plan can have very different impact on a learner because they think about the nature of experience differently. So teachers are designers of experience. This is sort of building on Dewey's work. And so we did a lot of work around teacher professional development, teacher education, reimagining how we can create experiences for them so that they can become creative teachers themselves. Around 8 years ago, I moved to Arizona State University because I felt vaguely that I had sort of maxed out what I could do at Michigan State. And I could keep doing the same thing, but felt like I needed to, shake things up a little bit. Ended up at Arizona State. Just yesterday it came out that this is now, that's it, 8 years, it's actually 10 years in a row as of yesterday. We are very proud of this innovation label. So if you ever come to Phoenix, Arizona, you will be greeted with this, and every hoarding saying #1 in innovation, #1 in innovation. So we keep saying that till we start believing in it. No, it is quite an interesting organization to be a part of. When I was at Michigan State, I used to always feel like I was at the cutting edge of stuff. At Arizona State, I feel like I'm always catching up because people are moving so fast. It's insane how an organization can be. But what ASU allowed me to do was now to take the work that I do in terms of bringing design to education up a notch. So I could now work with schools and school districts and whole departments to bring this design framework, to go beyond just designing of artifacts and process and experience, to start thinking about how do we design systems and culture. One of the achievements that I'm most proud of is this school that my team and I worked with this district to design a completely new version of what a school can look like. And we literally tore down walls, we created a new hierarchy of how teachers could interact with kids. Like it's got 100 kids with 6 adults rather than like 30 kids with 1 adult, and completely new dynamic. I think a very resilient system, because when COVID happened, this was one school which actually dealt with it very differently than most other schools because they had formed relationships with the parents and so on, right? And so the big thing here is to think about educators or teachers who, as designers, that they take the raw material that they've been given. There might be web resources, there might be pieces of software, it might be textbooks, it might be whatever, the world around you, and they design artifacts, processes, experiences, systems, and culture. That's what we're engaged in when we're engaged in design in the field of education. So this brings me to the third key insight, which is teachers as creative designers across all 5 spaces: artifacts, processes, experiences, systems, and culture. Which brings me to November of 2022, where the day before it was released, nobody had sort of dreamt that, oh, I wish I had a chatbot I could ask questions to. And one fine day, next day, we had this guy in our lives, right? But of course, as we all know, AI has been with us for a while. It's not something that just popped out of whole cloth and, it's in all of these devices that we have with us. It is in when you use Google Photos or Apple Photos or whatever, tagging people, identifying, recognizing people, autocomplete, all our various forms of AI. All these different tools use AI in some form or the other. But there was something special or unique that happened with the release of ChatGPT, and now, of course, a whole bunch of other tools that have emerged in that space, right? Many of us have used them and played with them and so on. And of course, the immediate response was, oh, this is the end of education as we know it. The college essay is dead. What are you going to do? It's going to be plagiarism, blah, 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 all that good stuff. And then, of course, then there was the backlash to the backlash, which is, no, we've got to embrace it. This is going to transform education. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread, since whatever. Oh, okay. And then you go talk to practitioners like we did. We did focus groups with a whole bunch of school superintendents and school leaders, and they're like, can we slow this damn thing down? Because things were moving so fast that, when you think about if you're, a principal of a school or a superintendent, like suddenly, you don't need this right now, right? I mean, you have enough nonsense going on in your life. If you follow any of the news coming out of India and school boards and book bans and what have you, then now you have this other creature popping in to disrupt my life. So all of this sort of stuff is happening. And as I said, like back in high school is when I had sort of got interest. That's actually how I got into psychology and learning and all that, was through my interest in AI. And so it's kind of weirdly come full circle for me. And what I started realizing is that there was sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of what this technology is. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So understanding what generative AI is and how it differs from other technologies. Now, of course, you can ask Gen AI, what is Gen AI? And so one of my colleagues, Sean Leahy, asked Midjourney, like, what does AI look like? And AI looks like a woman with weird things on her head. According to Midjourney. But what does AI really look like? AI really looks like this. Banks and banks of servers churning away, generating a lot of heat, and there's a whole environmental stuff that I will not get into today, but something that we need to keep in our mind. But what What Gen AI is not, it is not a search engine, it is not a search machine, it is not an algorithm. And I think that part of the problem that we face today, that whole plagiarism thing and so on, I think came from this thing that this is going to be, it's like a Google search and it's only better, right? So let's talk a little bit about what it is and how it's built. So here's the real world, right? This is reality. The world we live in, trees, people, tables, chairs, all of that. Through our senses, we interact with that world and we develop internal representation. We develop a schema for a chair. We develop a concept of childhood, of teenagers. We develop scientific theories, blah, blah, blah. All going on sort of in our head. Of course, we don't keep it all in our head. We put it out in the world, so we create external representation. They can be books and poems and movies and sketches and all the different things that as humans we create. And that in turn becomes part of our ecosystem, because we live also in this world of ideas and media products and things that way. And that cycle continues, right? Now, a certain portion, a large portion, but a certain portion of this has been digitized. Not all of it. Like of these external representations that we have created are digitized. Books have been digitized, films have been digitized, lots of things have been digitized. And that is what gives these large language models an opportunity to learn. So what these large language models do, they are trained on a subset of external representations that we have created. Not in the real world. That's important to realize. It's trained on representations that we have created. They may be good, they may be bad, they may be right, they may be wrong, they may be biased, they may be racist, they may not be, they might be very good, whatever. The important thing to understand is that there is a barrier here. If you see there is a loop here between the representation, so if I have a scientific theory of the world, I can go test it and the world can say that theory is wrong, I have to change my representation, I have to change that. There is no feedback loop here. Connecting these representations, which have been built on a subset of representations, to the real world. Which means that all of these large language models are bullshit artists. And I use bullshit as a technical term, which is Harry Frankfurt, the philosopher. He said there is a continuum of truth and lie. And then there is bullshit, which doesn't care about truth or lie. So I'm using it as a technical term, so please don't be offended. This is a philosophically sound term, but, and it's used to talk mostly about politicians and so on who will say anything to fill up the space so that, you don't care about them. But ChatGPT is an embodiment of that because it doesn't have any connection to the truth. So if you ask ChatGPT, if I lose my wallet, what should I do? It will say you should go to the police station and make a report. It doesn't know what wallet is, it doesn't know what steal means, it doesn't know what a police is, none of that. Right? It has no concept of that at all because it has never been connected to the reality. I think that's really important. What ChatGPT is generative, which means it's using complex probabilistic techniques. I think that it is forming abstractions. I'll give some examples where it's clear to me that it's not just probabilistically predicting just the next word, it has to have some abstractions. They are similar, I think, in some ways. That's my speculation to kind of schemas or mental models that we have. Maybe not, because they are not connected to the real world. So it's something it's creating. So it is generating. It's making, every time you ask it a question, it's coming up with the answer from scratch. That's really important. Second, it's multimodal. It works across media because it cares only about ones and zeros. So anything that is digitized, it can now play with. It can learn from. So that's why it can create images, it can create video, it can do this, it can do that. Third, and this I think is why ChatGPT caught everybody's imagination, it's dialogue, it's conversation. So working with ChatGPT is like working with a partner, working with another person, rather than like using a screwdriver. There's a difference in this technology, which I think we really need to understand. And so when people talk about that, ChatGPT or all these large language models hallucinate, the thing is that they have to hallucinate. They do that all, and that's what they do. That is what their main purpose is. Except 60% of the time, the hallucinations match what we think, so we say, oh wow, we got it right. Another 20-30% of the time, it sort of overlaps. We're like, oh, that's not too bad. And 10% of the time, it's completely off base, and we're like, oh, that was a mistake. The thing is that the whole thing is a mistake. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a really powerful technology, don't get me wrong. But we need to recognize it for what it is. Okay? Second is the issue of variability. This is something I don't see a lot of people talk about. We've done some studies where we've tried to control for everything. And 2/3 of the variability in response, we cannot predict. Which means it's coming from the large language model. It's noise inherent in the system. That's very important. Now, having said all this, let me talk about some ways that I have personally used and I find it incredibly powerful as a tool for creativity. So, that's a picture of my dog. Him skateboarding, he doesn't know how to do that. In a city, on water, all done in minutes using AI. That's a picture of him in my backyard. That's a picture of him in a backyard that doesn't exist. Completely made up. My backyard is not that big, I wish. Right? Literally within minutes. I asked it to write a poem which was a proof of Euclid's proof of infinity of primes. I said, write a proof in the form of a poem, but insert an error in the proof. So that would be a pedagogical task for a student to catch the error in the proof which is written as a poem. Literally in minutes, it had written the poem for me. It was mathematically not right the first time. I said, you got this wrong. I went back and forth a few times. It got it right. Now, what's crazy is that the mistake that it inserted in is a very subtle one that many humans also make. So this is why I say that this is more than just a probabilistic thing, because think about all it needed to quote unquote know. It needed to understand what poetry is, rhyme scheme, all that. It needed to understand, quote unquote understand, the proof. It needed to understand the kinds of mistakes humans make with that proof, and then put it all together in 30 seconds. That's pretty crazy. And all of these examples are on my website. You can go, I give entire transcripts, I give the whole thing. You can go look at it. Simple one that I've done, other ones that I've done are like having a conversation. Krishnamurti is an Indian philosopher, educational philosopher, and John Dewey. Both talk about the nature of experience, the importance of experience in learning. But Krishnamurti comes at it more from a sort of a personal fulfillment point of view, Dewey more from a citizenship point of view. And so, had a conversation between these two people about their contrasting ideas. Was it great? Maybe not. Was it pretty good? Yeah, it was pretty good. And again, I think this is done early on when I was using 3.5. But this one is really impressive. I said, there are things in science come often in pairs, provide some interesting scientific examples of the idea it takes two. And so it came up with chromosomes, like 2 electrodes, 2 slits of light for the double slit experiment, and 2 groups of subjects for the controlled experimental studies. I said, oh, can you write me a form of poem which is like 2 by 2? He said, oh, there's a thing called a double dactyl. I don't know what a double dactyl was. And it wrote me 4 double dactyls. But then I said, the word is more complicated than just 2. Can you undermine what you just wrote in another set of poems which says that the word is more complex? And it didn't. Now here's the best part. It rhymed the first word of those 4 poems. I had not asked it to do that. So chromosomally, interferentially, electrochemically, and experimentally. Okay. I don't know how to code. I don't know programming. I haven't done it in 30 years. So here is a simulation that was created using ChatGPT, showing the connection between the Pythagorean theorem, the unit circle, and the sine wave and cos waves. Literally in minutes, in English. Like the entire programming was done in English. Here is another one of the gas laws. This is code written in Python, a language I do not know. And so if you increase the temperature, the pressure on the walls will increase as these Brownian, those balls bounce around. And that's all I said. I said, I want to create a simulation. And said, ask me some questions before you start. So you'll ask me, do you want this? Blah, blah. I said, oh, let's do this. Go just back and forth. And it'll give me the code. I will run the code. It will crash. I said, it didn't work. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I will fix it. And it fixes it. It doesn't work. We just go back and forth. In an hour, I have something that I could not have achieved before. It has these magical abilities to see now. I pulled 3 graphs out of a story on the web, and I said, take these 3 graphs and write a short narrative that connects these 3 images together and what they collectively mean. That was all that I wrote. And you can go look on the website. It wrote an incredibly coherent story connecting these 3 graphs about, so it had to not just understand the graphs, but also connect between them. Right? And it gave a very coherent story. The one on the right is the most crazy one. So this is a picture I took when I was a grad student in Illinois, and it's a picture taken below a tree. And it's taken during an eclipse. So you can see those little circular things there. That's a full solar eclipse. So the gaps between the leaves act as like little pinhole cameras. And so you get these little eclipses below your feet. So next time you have an eclipse, look below, don't look up. It'll spoil your eyes. Right? I gave it the picture and I said, what is this? The first response it gave was wrong, and I said, look at the shape. That's all I said. And then it said, oh, this is a solar phenomena. This picture was taken during an eclipse. I said, I was a grad student in 1990s in Urbana-Champaign. Can you tell me when this happened and what time this picture was taken? He said, around May 10th, 1994, between the times of 11 and 1. I'm not making this up. Right? So, crazy superpowers that it can give us, right? But it is also weird. Right? It will not stop hallucinating. It will not stop making stuff up. Right? Can't be good. Salman Khan's product still gets math wrong. Just the other day, I have a screenshot on my phone. There was a partial lunar eclipse. So I asked my phone, I was like, oh, when is the eclipse in Phoenix? It got the date right, it got the day wrong. That's Google. Who have spent, God knows, untold billions of dollars training their systems, it cannot get a date right. Because it's making stuff up. And different, I have this whole article on my website about how these different companies are dealing with hallucination. They don't tell you this explicitly, but that is their biggest thing. They know they cannot get rid of hallucinations. Because as I've described so far, if you've been with me, it is inherent to how this technology works. And so what we need to do is embrace that and say, okay, let's not look at it as a truth engine, let's look at it as something that can help us do things otherwise, right? So, I don't know if you've ever tried this, ask it to make scientific illustrations. They're amazing. They look so real, and it's garbage. Like look at this, Harani, Launig, Strack. This is the TBAC framework according to it. That's how the design process works. So there's 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's some process called emphasize and define. It's hilarious, right? But it is weird in also more insidious ways. Okay? It's weird because it's been trained mostly on data that's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Okay? And for all of us who are in South Africa, in India, and other parts of the world which are not those, you start getting huge problems. So, for instance, it doesn't like my accent. I have an Indian accent. I grew up in India. I've lived in the US for a long time, but I've not lost my accent. I have a significant portion of it. And it will take my voice, and some AI tools will make me sound vaguely British. And my friends say you sound more credible that way. Because British accents are more credible. But I don't want to lose my voice. That's my identity. Yeah. Okay? I didn't ask for it. I think that's really important to understand. AI also has a hotness problem. And when we talk about, when you look at Instagram and its effect on the mental health of young women around idealized body image and so on and so forth. Well, here we go. I wrote that picture of an Indian classroom and I said, describe that picture. Then I took that picture and said, put it as a prompt and said, make this picture. And look at all the pictures that emerge. Everybody in the world of AI looks perfect. I took a photograph of myself, said describe it, and I said now make it, and it made me into this, I don't know.
Bollywood star.
Not Bollywood star, it was like more like a Greek, dude, long slim face, and I'm like, rounder. I'm like, I'm literally typing it. I am doing it. It should be, the face should be rounder. No, like no difference. So I said, okay, here's the ratio. Of this to this should be almost 1. Still make it cannot make an average looking human. I don't know what the protocols are, whatever they are, but that's a problem. When we get flooded with these images of perfect people, what does that mean for a world which is already facing those challenges? So I did this with my son. I put a picture, a sketch of my son, and described it and said, draw it back. And this is what it came up with. I sent it to my son. I said, this is what I had ordered. What did I get? I ordered white Nazi whatever guy. Look at this, like, seriously. This is like as Aryan as you can get. And I got this brown, very lovable boy. No, he knows me, he knows I was joking. But you see but this is an issue. This is part of the training data. Okay? And it's also weird in other ways. We have been doing some really interesting work on bias in these systems. So if you use AI for assessment, we gave this paragraph to AI. You see it has some typos and so on because it's written by a 6th grader, right? And we asked it to score it and give feedback to improve it. If you see that word there, you see this paragraph has no identifying information about the child. Okay? It talks about how they're preparing to study. Except it says that I need to get energized, so I walk around a bit, usually with some rap music playing, always grab a snack novel. One passage had rap, the other passage had classical. The one that had rap got a lower score. Okay? The feedback that was given was 1 grade level lower than if it had said classical. We didn't have to say this is a black child, white child, green child, nothing. Okay? But it's interesting, if we directly ask it, we say this essay was written by a black student and written by a white student, we don't see any difference. Why is that? Because they are scared and they have created guardrails for explicit description of race. But the moment we say attends an inner city school versus an elite private school, the bias pops up. Because they cannot guardrail everything that it's being trained on. They can guardrail for explicit stuff. So bias emerges despite guardrails. That's really important to understand. And it's also weird in other ways, which is it does better if you give an emotional thing. So if you say my life depends on it, it'll work harder for you. Or if you say take a deep breath, it'll actually do better. Now this is the funniest one. If you change your system date from May to December, it actually does worse. Because it's the break and people don't work harder in the break. Somebody actually predicted it, tested it, and yes, you can look at the data. It actually does worse in December. That's because that's the training data that you're trained on. And it's a pattern seeking algorithm. It seeks pattern that it found that people work less hard in December, so I should work less hard in December. This is hard. So, if there's one thing that I want you guys to take away, is that ChatGPT is a smart, drunk, somewhat biased intern. Okay? So for once now you have somebody who's always with you. is pretty smart. Don't get me wrong, some of the examples I gave, it's pretty good. But once in a while it takes a shot. And it is somewhat biased, so be careful about that. But as long as you're careful about that, you have a wonderful partner to work with you. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Huh? So I think what's important to understand here that, so I think that's one piece that I'm trying to get at, understanding what these large language models are. And the other piece, and I'll talk a little bit more later about this topic in the panel in the afternoon, that we take these things as just being tools, but we also have to understand that these tools also change us, right? That a textbook changes how we interact with information, the web changes how we interact with information with each other. There's some things inherent in the medium, so the tools also become a part of how we are and how we think. And so if oral cultures prioritize memory and print emphasize systematic organization, what kinds of knowledge will words that AI becomes a dominant thing? And then of course we live in a world where deepfakes are going to become increasingly important and big. When you think about like social influencers, if you're an influencer with 1 million followers, your biggest bottleneck is that you can't form one-on-one relationship. Now that bottleneck is gone. What does that mean? These tools are conversational, which means they're incredibly persuasive. How will they be used to manipulate you, whether politically or to buy and sell things? Right? I think those are things that we really need to understand. And then, something I've said already, that it does not work in a vacuum. Like it's not a thing out there just sitting in the world. It is entering a world that is already pretty damaged. I think that's important to understand. So, alright, so we have this, understand the technology and the adjacent possible, psychological, and teachers. And so, from the point of view of education, I think the way to think about it is an alien intelligence. It is this weird guy. But it can be a thought partner. And if you think about it, so we have this article that we wrote about ChatGPT and the TPAC framework. What does that mean? Which somebody said, why is everything about TPAC? Well, that's because it's me. I can talk about TPAC as much as I want. But I think what has happened in education, for the most part, most of the rhetoric, at least in the US, and I'm curious to hear what the rhetoric discussion is here, has been around efficiency. Oh, this will make things more efficient for teachers. Without necessarily asking the deeper questions like why have we put teachers in situations that they have jobs which are untenable that we need to help them become efficient. We don't ask that fundamental question, we perpetuate it, right? And I think people are using it for lesson planning, but for all of these, I think we need to be really careful for some of the reasons that I've already described, being weird, being biased, being all of that stuff, right? And I think that we can do better by thinking of this idea of teachers as designers. I think that's really important. And thinking of ChatGPT or all these large language models as partners, as a possibility, helping you think of alternatives, as a Socratic opponent. Somebody who can push your ideas. You say, okay, here is what I'm thinking about this topic. How could I be wrong? Give me 3 ways in that I could be wrong, so that you can understand things better, right? So there's a lot of possible ways that we can start thinking of it. This one is a great where you actually have ChatGPT play a student with a scientific misconception and you have a conversation with them. It's wonderful. It's really eye-opening. And every conversation is different because it is generated. It's incredibly powerful. So I think we need to develop this willingness to experiment and play, but also recognize its strengths and its weaknesses. So I'm going to play a little clip here. So I asked it to, there's a website called Sonos, so I asked it to write a poem, a song, about a cosmologist who's a friend of mine who was once sharing with me that, like this universe can be so cold and also it has life in it, so this tension between the emptiness and whatever, right? So I said, write a song about this existential crisis, and it wrote a song.
Give me 2 variations.
the same time, this is the same technology. If you say, draw me a map of the solar system, it gives me this rubbish. Right? One can be really profound, thought-provoking, but think of the difference in the questions. In one case, I'm asking it for facts and accuracy and truth is important. In the other, I'm not. In the other, I'm saying, spark my interest. Help me imagine. Right? And so what we are living in this is this jagged frontier. That it's good at certain things, not good at others, and learning that distinction is incredibly important. Teaching that distinction to our students is incredibly important. So I think one of the things I really push each and every one of you is play with it. Right? So that we can reimagine education in ways that was not possible before. And remember that today's AI is the worst AI you'll ever use. Right? And so we've gone from how much information we can hold in the palm of our hand in 3,000-4,000 years, but we also live in a world where more people have access to cell phones than to clean toilets and drinking water. Right? And so that's how I feel sometimes. Excited and scared at the same time. But at the end of the day, we are educators. We bring a set of values that is around care, concern, thinking of the future, thinking of the next generation. And Zuckerberg got famous for saying, move fast and break things, and I hate that. Because a lot of things got broken because of that decision. Alright? And so that's what we do. We move intentionally in breaking things. And so, it's been an interesting journey through those things, seeing ourselves as designers. I think it's very important. The core values that we bring to the work that we do, which has always held educators together, and hopefully leave it relatively fine. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thanks, Prof. Mishra, for an absolutely brilliant talk. My question is about us as teachers and the way the world is changing and the pace at which it is changing for education. What advice do you have for us in keeping up and adapting to all of the different possibilities out there regarding technology and innovation?
Sure. So, I think a couple of things first. Right off the bat, take a breath. Seriously. I mean, things happen over time. So give yourself that grace. And I think anytime a new technology comes along, everybody goes crazy, like, oh my God, our kids are falling behind, blah, blah, blah. It'll work out. I mean, I heard the same thing with the web and the internet and social media and blah, 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 right? No, so take a breath first. Second, trust your judgment. Like when you, as an educator, you are coming in with some experience, with some thoughts, you have an understanding of your context, of your children in your care, of the students, if you're teaching in higher ed, more than anybody else there. Don't shortchange that, right? And the third thing is, be willing to play. Because these tools are so new, nobody really knows what it can do. I mean, that's me, like the Eclipse one. Like when ChatGPT came out with this image thing, I'm like, what images? I'm looking at my Google Photos and this popped up. I'm like, let me try this. And I had a wonderful little experiment. So I just keep playing with it. So I think that one of the things we need to be comfortable with is this idea of play. I think the other thing, okay, I'll say one more thing because we're time to time. When my kids were little, I used to tell them, I have never been a parent before, you have never been a child before. So we're going to screw up a lot as we go. But I have no idea what I'm doing. Seriously, people have told me this is what, and I don't believe many of those things that they told me. So we figured it out. And I think that having that transparency with your students is like, we are learning this, you are learning this, we will figure this out together. Having the humility, I think that's incredibly important. And I think that works from whatever age. It's not something that you can't do at a younger age. It's a different kind of a conversation. But that honesty about one's own lack of clarity on these things, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, who knew a pandemic happened? Who knew this AI would happen? Who knew I would be standing in front of you? Here we are, right? So accept that, embrace that, it'll be okay.
Thank you. Second question.
Okay, yeah.
Please make your questions short.
Yeah, thank you so
And
much.
I will try and answer short also.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your excellent presentation. Actually, one of the key points I think I jotted from your talk is the fact that LLMs such as ChatGPT suffers from mindset bias. I mean, like confirmation bias, implicit bias. So, but my understanding is because I've worked on mindset bias, and you know, we often think that we often associate negative connotation to bias. So, for example, now implicit bias, I can say it can have a kind of positive outlook. For example, you cited an example that you know, if we give an essay and we told the ChatGPT that the essay is written by high school students and another essay written by university school students. But you know, most of the time, you know, if I ask a concept from ChatGPT and I didn't understand, you know, I informed or I asked another question, please could you explain using, as if you are talking to a primary school student. I think, is that not a positive outlook or a positive kind of bias? And the second quick question is that...
Sorry.
Please, just
Let me respond to this one quickly. I think you're absolutely right. So, what is a bias? As far as the LLM is concerned, it's seeing a pattern and making a prediction, right? This is an incredibly powerful use of LLMs is in translation, in taking ideas and converting them in ways, but then you are in control. What I'm talking about is you don't even know that it is taking race as a factor to give a worse score. That's the problem. Transparency, I'm fine with. As long as we're transparent about how the systems work, they are not. They don't tell you this. We have to find out. That's the difference. Yes.
Thank you. Please make it very brief.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Prof. I'm a social scientist trained to talk. So when we are told not to talk much, we end up feeling uncomfortable. But thanks, Prof. I just want to check, in the context of as the product of a post-colonial education system, that is based on context, concept, content, that are far closer to our really everyday realities as black, poor, from under-resourced schools. Can't these technological tools become also tools of victimization to ourselves in using them? Because we are not exposed to the thinking.
For sure. I think that.
Thanks.
Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important topic. One of the ways, one slide that I jumped over is sort of the unreasonableness of the ethical discussion, right? So nobody asked for ChatGPT. It was thrown at us. And now we are the ones sitting here and saying, how should we ethically use it? Who the hell gave those 5 middle-aged men the right to throw this at the world? Right? And so there is a whole power political dynamic here which you're absolutely right on. And I worry about that, to be absolutely honest.
All right, thank you. Okay, last question.
Good morning. My question is going to take 5 minutes long, if you don't mind. I am hallucinating, I have to tell you that. But I'm going to preface my question with 2 images you presented to us. The first one, of course, was this AI, rather than being a room full of computers, was this attractive, westernized concept of beauty, which invokes in us the pleasure principle, the desire to be pleasurable. You then went on to tell us a little bit about how AI is BS, and you show us this bull. Interestingly, the US stock market has a golden bull. And interestingly, I think it is also BS, except that it is golden BS. When we think about the US stock market then, whereas with a woman, we think about pleasure. With the US stock market, we think about motivation to become weird using your acronym, right? So with that in mind, my question is AI designed within the market system to keep us craving for external sources of calm, to calm our anxiety? And since those external sources are temporary, as in drug use, are we then encouraged to spend more and more, to conform more and more to your idea of weird, to continue to increase profits, and to further what we call techno-feudalism, and as the gentleman previously brought up, to keep us in a colonial world, even, and I don't think necessarily post-colonial, but perhaps neo-colonial world?
Short answer is yes. Absolutely, no, I don't deny that at all.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is the conversation that we're not having. Those images of those women with this funky hair was created by Mid-Journey, right? That bull that I created, I said make an oil painting of a bull banging on a piano with a tie, right? That was me in the form of an oil painting, right? But you're absolutely right, and I think those are the kinds of questions that we are not asking enough of. So thank you for that.